Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of In the Prog Seat. It's Tuesday night. We got the crew here for another album study. Let me introduce everybody before we get started with the album. We got Chad Hutchinson in the house. He's messing around with his little handy image shower, I can tell. Oh, okay. Sorry, it's spill the beans. Okay. We got who's the host of this evening, Mr. Eric Porter, Ken Golden, the Professor of Prog, and the other half of the Professor of Prog duo. We haven't seen him in a bit, but he's back, Mr. Steve Feigenbaum. And all the way from Chicago, we just did that awesome Animals as Leaders ranking the album show yesterday. Mr. George Lemie, what's going on? Actually, I said just yesterday. We recorded it yesterday, but by the time you guys are seeing this episode, it would have been a week ago. So sorry, spoil when we tape these things, I guess. Anyway, it's album study day once again, and it's Eric's turn this week, and he has chosen Happy the Man, self-titled debut. There you go. There we go.
All right. Well, at least everyone is prepared in terms of having heard
it. That is true. That is true. So how we generally do these is I turn it over to whoever is kind of hosting the show. That'll be Eric, and he's going to talk a little bit about this album, and he may have some questions for all of us. We're all going to kind of give our opinion on Happy the Man, and we'll come to some kind of conclusion at the end. So, Eric, with all that being said, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, sir. Well, good evening, everybody. I'm really looking forward to this. This is one of my favorite bands. Happy the Man. We are discussing their first self-titled album, Happy the Man, released on Arista Records in August of 1977. Just a touch under 50 minutes, produced by the amazing Ken Scott, who had also worked with Supertramp, Mahavishnu Orchestra, I think. I just love these guys. I know a few of you on the panel have a lot more history with them than I do in terms of even personal interaction. They never really got, I guess, elevated in terms of high profile, but I think most prog fans, or at least a lot of them, do consider them one of the best American prog bands that ever came through. In terms of this one, the band had formed, I believe, like 1973, 74. Went through some lineup changes. They're based out of Virginia. And for me, their music, I think they just have a very wide range, a lot of depth. Elegant might be a word that comes to mind at times. Chops galore. But I think, Pete, you say this all the time, ensemble playing. These guys, as great as they are, I think melodic, but they always feel like they're together and everything just sounds, to me, this band always worked. I don't really know how else to put it. They just always connected with me. I did think about one thing before we get going. When we did the Obscured by Clouds, we were talking about soundtrack. That kind of came to me with some of their music. I find them very cinematic, very visual sometimes when I'm listening to their music. I think these guys could have done soundtrack music, incredible music, actually. And I think if you kind of explore them, their solo stuff. I mean, I know, Pete, you did a album ranking, so Crafty Hands, I think, was your number one. It might be mine for, I think Crafty Hands usually gets talked about a lot more. And I think really the only other background people might need is they actually were signed to Arista Records, a major label, kind of at the tail end of maybe when prog was kind of on its way the other side of the mountain. And unfortunately, I think they, from what I read, Clive Davis apparently said, I don't understand what's going on here, but you guys are telling me they're great, so sign up. I heard or read that they had a 5-year deal. They only got 2 albums. I don't think they sold very well and probably unceremoniously dropped from the label. But the band, at least at this point, consisted of Stan Whitaker on guitar and vocals, the amazing Kit Watkins on keyboards, Frank Wyatt, who I feel like is their secret weapon. Unfortunately, Frank had passed earlier this year, I believe in January. Rest in peace, Frank. But I love the horns he added to this band. He does a lot of the writing. So I think Frank is really kind of maybe an unsung hero in this band. Rick Cannell on bass and Mike Beck on drums and percussion. And I think that kind of wraps everything up in terms of maybe I know you guys have a lot more knowledge, so please feel free to drop it in. Pete, I wanted to start with you. You always end up being last, so I want to have you go first tonight. Tell us your thoughts on the album, and I do have a question for you when you get done with that. I try to come up with a question for everybody, so let's hear your thoughts, and then I'll throw a question at you.
Well, first of all, thank you, Eric. I've always really enjoyed this album. Actually, enjoy both of them, actually. And I enjoy like I mean, Steve can probably, when Steve goes, he can talk a little bit about how Cuneiform got involved with all these albums that came out and collections and things and live recordings that came out years and years later. But I always felt that, and you hinted at it before, that these guys were probably a couple of years too late to the game. Unfortunately, the US prog scene was always kind of following the Brits, right? I mean, that's just basically how it always seemed to work. And in 1977, this style of music is not really much in fashion anymore. Even to me, their music is part prog and part fusion. There's a lot of fusion going on in some of this stuff as well. And they're even late to that as well. And I think it's a real shame because there's some fantastic playing and writing on this album, superior musicianship, and unfortunately, it just never really got the credit that it was due. I don't think, so few American prog bands in this era, Kansas kind of spearheaded it all. And you could arguably say out of any band that got signed to a major label, I mean, Happy the Man is really one of the few other ones from the US that you could even talk about. But there's some standout tracks on here. And you talked about Frank Wyatt, who I absolutely agree. I think he is the secret weapon here. Adds those a little bit of keyboards. Kim does all the flashy stuff, but I think that Frank's playing is really, really important. I love his little sax stuff that bursts through on various songs on here. Some of my favorite songs from this band are on this album. I mean, Stumpy Meets the Firecrackle and Stencil Forest is terrific. I love that these guys don't try to hide their little kind of jazzy tendencies. There's like this whimsical, quirky nature to their music, which I really like, which I can only really compare because it's not real jazz, but I can kind of compare it to what some of the Canterbury bands were doing a few years earlier. Love the weaving guitars and sax and keys, just really beautiful stuff. I mean, Tim Watkins' synth work on stuff like Mr. Mirror is so great. Knee-Bit Nymphs in Limbo, another kind of real quirky, whimsical track. I love that. New York Dream Suite is absolutely terrific. And you really hear like some of the chops in this group on songs like that. Really complex. It's proggy, it's kind of fusion-y, but it's still really melodic and gorgeous. I think Kim Watkins steals the show on that one. I mean, all in all, really, really good album. I think the only thing that stops me from giving an album like this 5 out of 5 stars is you got the 2 vocal pieces. Don't think they needed to be here. The vocals, they're not really well done. And it's just like the vocals are thrown in there as an afterthought, just to let's have a couple vocal tracks. Maybe we'll get some radio play or something like that.
We'll talk about that.
Right, exactly. But neither one of those songs are like kind of really radio friendly. Right. I don't know. I mean, I guess maybe Up Upon the Rainbow sort of has like a Camel feel to it, is sort of, but I don't know. The vocals don't need to be there because the instrumental work is just so good on both of the tracks that have vocals. But all in all, great keyboards, tasty guitars, really nice arrangements, and I love the production of this album. And like I said, there's 3 tracks on here that to me are probably 3 of their best. And I think it's a really, really fun album, quirky album, intelligent album, really, really gorgeous stuff. I love it. It's really, really good.
So my question for you, I was kind of going through the Happy the Man lore. Your thoughts on the day spent with Peter Gabriel. How do you think if he had brought them on to be his backing band? I know they were kind of I think they were in that midst of, they had been contacted or were in contact maybe with the rest of it, weren't there yet. What do you think they would have done on that first record? I think what I read was, is it Slow Burn? I know there was another one he said that they had kind of worked on with Peter that day, and obviously it didn't end up working out. But Stan sounds like, the little I read, that he had some pretty fond memories of that day and felt they gelled well with Gabriel. What do you think would have happened either with the band or how that album would have turned out with them as his group?
I think that album would have sounded tremendously different, like really different. I'm picturing, as you're asking that, I'm picturing that first album and thinking, wow, it would not sound anything like that at all. I don't know if that would have worked, right? I would have loved to have heard it. I just now, history shows what it shows, and I think there is a raw energy on those first couple Peter Gabriel albums, or even we're just talking about the first one, right? There's this kind of like post-Genesis feel, but he's embracing like all that's coming up in music at the time in the late 70s. And I don't know if that album would have sounded anything like how we know it if the guys in Happy the Man were the backing band. Would I have loved to have heard it? Yeah, because I think it would have been quite interesting. I just don't know if it's a marriage that really works. Right. But I think I would have loved to have heard it.
And just quickly, I know you were at Nearfest. Do you have any memory of that performance or anything that stood out?
Yeah. I was totally jacked for that. That was like big news at the time, right? Because they had been gone for so long, and regardless of what you think of the album that they put out, which I kind of like, right? It's not great, but I like it. I thought that was an amazing performance, and it was just I felt like I was seeing prog rock royalty and legends, and I got to meet a bunch of them, and they're just really, really nice guys. And that was really good. That was one of the more memorable performances from those many Nearfests that I attended. So yeah, very, very happy to be there for that. Happy to see Happy the Man. Yeah.
Indeed. All right. Ken, I want to go to you next. Give me your thoughts on this record. And I got a question for you as well when we get through.
Sure. I guess I'm like most people. I have a marginal preference for Crafty Hands. I think I actually got Crafty Hands. Actually, not true. I got this one first, and when I got it, I'm not sure I even really gave it much attention. Then I got Crafty Hands, really dug into it, and we'll go back to this one from time to time. It's a pretty great album, and I started out doing, like the track by track analysis. I stopped because it occurred to me as you're listening to it that this really is an ensemble. I mean, these guys, my notes, I said, the thing about this band is just when you think one member is going to dominate a track, another steps forward.
Yeah.
There doesn't seem to be a need to do a track by track analysis. Very tight playing and arrangements. Everyone's a star, including the producer. The music is dynamic, shifting moods from serene. You get that opener, Starborn, that spacey opener, right, to energetic, stumpy. I mean, that's blazing, right? Very big, spacious sound from Ken Scott. I mean, he really, he killed it. I mean, the sound on the album is phenomenal. And the more I listen to it, the more I start to hear the jazz rock thing. For me, I hear more Return to Forever. Everybody talks about Mahavishnu. I hear a little bit more. I hear more Chick Corea in Kit's playing in terms of the speed and dexterity, as opposed to like a Jan Hammer. That's my take on it. If you want to fight me over it, I'm sure Steve will. He's a look at him. Look at him. He's a fighter. That guy. He's very arrogant. The only knock about the album is what everybody else says. The vocals, Stan is not a great singer. And if they were going to commit to having vocals, they should have even brought in like a great guest, let Clive David pick a great guest from the Arista roster, or just get somebody full time that's a killer. I mean, it really was, 77 was the death knell. I mean, there was no place for basically an instrumental, symphonic, progressive rock band. Forget about major label or anything. 1977, there was no
anywhere.
Anywhere. It was just, they were the square peg in the round hole, but they were fucking great. And and up until, look, this and Crafty Hands were fantastic. Even the archival stuff that Steve put out was great. The third album, the demos, it just carried on. I mean, it's all great stuff. I didn't like the last album they did. the one they did for Inside Out. For me, that was kind of limp wristed. I didn't really care for that. But like Death's Crown and all this, they had great players, great catalog. I couldn't imagine anybody not liking it. It's funny. I don't hear everybody was comparison saying like they hear Genesis in their music. I don't hear any Genesis at all.
I hear some in the early stuff.
I hear maybe on the stuff Steve put out, and maybe on the Cuneiform releases. I actually hear, if anything, I hear a little bit General Giant. Did I insult him? He left.
Yeah, he's gone.
Steve, no, it's the fart button is down below. Yeah, I hear a little General Giant, not overtly, in terms of complexity, because there really is so much going on, and they're so tightly knit, and to me that's what I get from like the Gentle Giant comparison, but it's not like they literally sound like Gentle Giant at times. This is great stuff.
So my question for you, Ken, is you've run a label, you've signed bands, you've worked with bands over the years. Your thoughts on them getting a deal with Arista in '77? Would you, how would you have maybe done anything different with them to get them out there? Would it have mattered? But
I don't
you have your hands in that side of the business. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, that was before my time. I was a listener, not a producer. But I mean, by '77, there was no place for them. They were about 3 or 4 years too late. And yeah, he's coaching me now. He's holding up fingers like.
At least it's 4, not 1.
Yeah. So no, they were. They were about 3 or 4 years too late. And I have one quick anecdote, and that is, so years ago I used to do a lot of tape trading, and one of the guys that my friend used to trade tapes with was a guy named Rob Eaton, and Rob is a producer. Well, I think he's a producer now, but he was an engineer, and he was working on an album with Pat. I think it was he was doing Pat Metheny, I think. But then he got hired to do a Mike and Mechanics album. So Rob went over to the farm, which is Genesis's studio, and Rob was a tape trader, and my friend used to trade with Rob, and we told Rob, see if you can get some Genesis tapes, and Rob said, I don't know anything about Genesis. What do I look for? He says, so we said anything from like 1974, 1975, because there were no Lamb tapes or anything like that. So Rob comes back with some tapes. But basically, Mike Rutherford said, take whatever you want, because Genesis used to record all their shows, and they had a huge tape archive. And Mike Rutherford was really cool. And he said, yeah, just take what you want. So one of the things that Rob came back with was a master reel-to-reel, and we were all excited. What's on this reel-to-reel? Turned out it was the Happy the Man album.
That's funny.
So that's where it went. It sat, So, and I couldn't, just go back to what you asked, Pete. I couldn't conceive of those guys fitting in with Peter. I mean, it wouldn't have sounded like that first album at all. I mean,
right?
It wouldn't have sounded totally different. But yeah. To answer your question, there was just no space for them in 1977. Nobody, and it wasn't just them. Even if they were a European band, there was no what band ascended in front. What prog band ascended starting in 1977? I don't think any.
That's a good point.
True.
That was I mean, bands had careers, but they had already established their fan base, 3-4 years before.
Right.
So.
Yep. All right, thanks. Steve, I'll go to you, our guest tonight. Same thing, your thoughts on the album, and then my question for you was kind of what Pete had mentioned, all the stuff on your label, how that came about. If you feel okay talking about that, that'd be kind of interesting to hear.
Yeah, it's not that interesting, but I'm happy to talk about it. So I want to say 2 things up front, that I'm a very big fan, and I think that the album's a really great album. And then I'm going to talk about why it's not as good as it could be, but I still think it's a really great record and that they were really a great band. The other thing is that even though I've worked with them professionally, I really don't know any of those guys really well. And so everything that I'm saying is not insider knowledge. It's just informed guesses, and also kind of based on the fact, like, I was following them before any of you guys, because I saw their first show when they moved from Harrisonburg, Virginia, which was a small college town, to Washington, D.C. So,
Steve, how'd you know?
how do I know?
How'd you know to go see them?
Great question. Because there was a radio station, WGTB, and WGTB had an annual festival called the Panda Media Festival, and I used to listen to WGTB constantly, and they played tracks. I don't remember if they played a track or tracks of one of the bands who was going to play, and it was "Leave That Kitten Alone," Armone, undoubtedly the same version as is on Beginnings, and it was like, it was like, oh, it's like a rock band with a symphonic orchestra. You know, it wasn't. They're just good at doing that, but oh, it kicked my ass into the next universe, and I went down to see them. You know, so yeah, I mean, it was college radio. So those are the two things that I wanted to say at first, because, you know, I don't have insider knowledge. The things that I'd like to state, even though I think it's a really, really good record, is that Mike Beck, the drummer, was severely underutilized on the record compared to what he did. That was I assume, a decision by Ken Scott. And because he was not only a drummer, but he was a percussionist. He has videos on YouTube where he demonstrates what he used to play when he played with Happy the Man, and it's very different from the record. It's not very different from the record. It's the record and a whole lot more. And that aspect of them, which was a big part of the sound of everybody who saw them before they signed to Arista, immediately noticed was lacking. And I'd say that the song that sounds the most like they used to sound like is New York Dream Suite, because you can hear there's more of Mike doing what he did. So that's one thing. And again, I'm speaking as someone, I saw them probably, other than the Reformation, where I saw them a bunch of times, I never saw them after they signed to Arista. I never saw them with Coco. They never played a gig with Ron Riddle, but I never saw them because when they signed to Arista, instead of doing these shows at all ages venues, at movie theaters and alternative kinds of spaces, they played the bars, and I wasn't quite old enough. And so I couldn't get in. So I never, I saw them in 75 and 76, and then I never saw them again until shortly before they played at Nearfest. They were nice enough to invite me to a rehearsal, so I did see them before Nearfest. But anyway, so Mike being kind of underutilized. And the other thing is that if you look on YouTube, there's a pretty famous, they performed on that same radio station that I mentioned, WGTB. They performed a live on the air concert October 30th, 1975. And that's worth hearing. Again, it's not as well recorded as the album, but it's a good stereo recording of them in the studio. There's a lot of compression, but you can hear Mike Beck, so you can hear what I'm talking about missing. The other thing that's kind of odd is their three best loved epics were either left off both of their albums or were severely truncated on their albums. Leave That Kitten Alone, Armone was a big showstopper. According to the liner notes on the Musea version of the first album, Ken Scott didn't like it and didn't make it. Okay, fair enough. the song Carousel on the first album is literally it is 12 bars from a song called I Carve the Chariot on the Carousel, and which they used to do live. And it was a big epic. And Carousel's great, but it's completely like, what? Like, where's the rest of the song? They took this little bit of it and repeat it over and over, and Kit plays amazing solos. All right, whatever. And then the other one that was left off is a song called Open Book Without Words, which is actually an excerpt from Death's Crown. But it's on a Crafty Hands, but as Open Book, and it leaves half of it off. And then while they did have a vocalist in their days in Harrisonburg, they actually had two different vocalists. By the time they moved here, they were an instrumental band. And, I don't know as I said, I have no insider knowledge, but I would be willing to bet money that adding vocals and having Stan be the vocalist is 100% coming down from the record label or Ken Scott or both. Because, again, I saw them 10 to 16 times. They never had a vocal. And then, they signed to Ariston. This record comes out, and there's 2 songs that are vocals out of what, 10? What? All right. I wanted to also say that when they moved here, they were completely formed. Every time I saw them, they were amazing. Incredible sense of dynamics live. Went from a whisper to a roar, and did that right from the stage. Had just incredibly great live dynamics. One thing that's sort of interesting about them, and you will hear it if you look at the 70s live recordings, at least the ones with Mike Beck, is everything was compositionally and performance-wise completely worked out, meaning that it's really fun to hear the live records, especially since you can hear the Mike Beck aspect and you can hear the songs that I said got truncated or left off. But the solos are exactly the same. Stan always played the same solo on this song in the same play. Kit always played the same. So they were solos, but they were composed solos, which is kind of a hard way to do things. But Happy the Man were definitely they worked really hard. And then the last thing I'm going to say is, the record was a gigantic commercial flop. When I started Wayside Music, I used to buy cutouts from a company called Countrywide, and Ken Golden's was it your first job, Ken?
I'm 14 years old. I was a picker at Countrywide.
He was a picker at this big cutout warehouse. And I remember now, I had just started. And so, I wasn't thinking long term, but they had the first Happy the Man album for 50 cents. If you bought 500, they were 25 cents. If you bought 1,000, they were 12.5 cents. So that's a lot of copies sitting there, sadly, whatever, and that's a pretty low price. So, what Ken said about it was the wrong time for them, I think he's essentially 100% spot on. So that's my take on it.
So you guys,
And
I thought he was useful.
They, even with all my things that I'm saying, a lot of which only had to do with my having seen them way before the record, still a great record. They were a great band. The Muse Awakens is not a great record. Some of it's great. It's basically overproduced. I saw Happy the Man's last ever concert, which was at Prog Day in 2010, something like that. Anyway, it was the second time they played Prog Day, and they did they did other stuff and the entire album, and they kicked ass. And it's really a shame that didn't come out instead of this very, I think, hey, we got a chance. Let's tweeze the fucking life out of it, which is, I think, what they sort of did.
Great.
Eric,
Yes.
beat me up.
Hey, no, I'm taking it in because you're pretty lucky to have seen them at that stage. And it's interesting what you said, because I'm going to go to George, and my question to George did involve Mike Beck. So, George, give me a rundown of the album, and then I'll ask you your question.
Well, I probably came to them the latest by far. I never heard them until this show started. One of the earliest shows.
Wow.
I don't remember if it was instrumental albums or debut albums, but Pete had them on his list. And I had heard the name before, but I had never checked in with him. I think the name was kind of off-putting, and I just never had that friend that would state their case. I never ran into anybody, whether in real life or online, that was pushing this band. But I dug into them. I'm struck by how it breaks down by composer. I'm sure no one's going to be surprised that I like the Whitaker songs. To me, those two tunes, those are fusion tunes. It doesn't strike me as anything but fusion, those two tracks, which he calls cartoon music. I found that amusing. Yeah, it's got a little of that playfulness. Like a lot of this band in general is kind of in that basket with a lot of the 70s bands that were borderline prog and fusion. Bruford, the Dregs, National Health, Gong, bands like that. There's enough of both sides of it that you could draw the fans over. The Watkins tunes, they're contemplative, soundtracky. I tend to like those, but not love those. Of course, I'm on board with everybody on the vocal tunes. I will say, "Upon the Rainbow," I think is a good song, and the vocal melodies are good. The presentation, but the actual performance. I mean, the dude's not a singer. He sounds like a guy that got pressed into service, and that's.
I think he sounds like that because he's the guy who got pressed into service, and imagine how much worse everybody else sang.
Yeah, exactly.
The vocals on that, I think the vocals on that one are definitely better than Helix.
Yes, for sure, and it's a better song too. It's a more well-written song.
I mean, I've gotten to the point now after all these years where I even enjoy the vocal songs, but there's no doubt that
They're not offensive.
Got pressed into service.
No, they're not offensive. Yeah.
No,
I like
just-
Upon
they're
the
just-
Rainbow. I do
Vocals
like
are like placeholders.
It's not like that Coliseum 2 track. Was that?
No, that was painful. that was rough.
Yeah, so I like the Wyatt tunes, the instrumentals though. Carousel, okay, it's a part, but man, there's something about it, that mood.
that vibe, I agree, George. That's got
Yeah,
haunting, spooky
Dark.
vibe to it.
Mhm.
yeah, it's very
Keyboard line's
dark.
Fantastic. Yeah, dark.
Even
Exactly.
Ferraro was talking it up this week. I was like, even he clued into it. I mean, it's just right there with the vibe. And New
Well,
York
it's funny
City-
you said that, because a lot of this is very playful, and then you get, that's like you said, that's kind of a change of mood on a lot of the other tracks. Really
Yeah.
turns it over a little bit.
almost looking at the track list as it goes on, and you look at the composer, like, oh, this is kind of a song. Takes you to another spot, which is cool actually. I might prefer this to Crafty Hands. It's close, it's pretty close, but I think I do listen to this one more. And like Pete said, Stumpy and Knee Bitten, they're as good as anything that they ever did to me. I mean, those are just great tunes. Great for not just them, for the whole era. So yeah, it's a 4-star album for me.
Can I put a general question out there though? Is anyone find Starborn an odd opener?
Oh yeah.
I
Yeah.
would
I mean,
have
it was as an opener for an album.
yes.
Where would you have put it?
I don't know, but I think I would have liked something. I like to get punched in the face right out of the gate. That's just me. And there's plenty of that on here. I thought it was a little maybe a little slow to get things started. That's just me. I like the song. I just don't know that I like the placement of it.
I like it.
I wrote that it kind of sucks you into the album, kind of draws you in.
Yeah, it's like a nice intro. It's kind of it's I agree. Totally agree.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
It's not
I mean,
common.
certainly, for lack of a better term, I'm going to call them tone poems. These kind of, I mean, they're virtuosic because all those guys playing are virtuosic, but they're kind of the least virtuosic thing. They're kind of mood setters. That was a big part of their sound.
Yeah, I felt like a lot of that came from Frank. Like Starboard, and you get a lot of that mood from Frank, and then you get just enough of a tease of Kit Watkins' fireworks to lead you into to Knee Bitten. I'm sorry, to Stumpy. Sorry.
And I think it also kind of clues you into where Kit's head was at as a writer, because a lot of this stuff he went kind of all atmospheric kind of solo stuff, whether it's ambient, atmospheric, whatever you want to. It kind of clues you into, I think, where Kit was. And like George said, I think you've got Stan maybe writing the more aggressive stuff. Frank, I think, Frank and Stan seem to write a lot together, I think, on this one. Or there's a couple, and I think Kit and Frank also.
There's one that's Stan and Frank, because it's obviously Stan wrote words to one of Frank's songs.
Okay. And George, my question for you, I kind of feel funny about asking this now because of what Steve said, but when I was listening to this, and Steve, obviously you had that, you got to see them, so you saw what went on stage, but I still got a lot. I felt like Beck was very in tune. He's not just always pounding. I found a lot of percussion stuff going on, a lot of hi-hat work. I think there's wood blocks, and I'll forget the name of some, but I thought he's kind of a unique drummer. Did you pick up on that, George? I know you're a drummer as well, so did he do anything for you in that regard?
Honestly, he doesn't command my attention.
Okay.
Obviously he's good. Just to handle this music, you got to be good. But never, when I listen to this band, am I ever drawn in by, listen to that drum part.
Okay.
But when you clue into him, yeah, of course he's good.
The other thing I'd like to just sort of mention to Eric and everybody, but on YouTube, Happy the Man were on a local news show. They had a thing called Catch a Rising Star, and it's on YouTube, and it has the sound. It's them, like, I think it's them in their
Steve,
house.
is it like black and white? Or
I
I
don't
think I remember seeing that.
But anyway, it's the only footage of the Mike Beck band, and you can get an idea of how gigantic. I mean, he didn't just have a kit and a wood block and a hi-hat. I mean, he had a stage full of percussion stuff. I mean, like hours and hours of setup type stuff. And there's teeny weeny little bit of it, and obviously Mike's a good drummer, but him being like a drummer playing a drum kit is not what he was about in that band, at least until they signed with Arista, and then it became what he was about. And is that why he left? I don't know.
Did he leave, or was he pushed?
Oh no, he left.
Okay.
He definitely left.
All right, so Chad, I'm saving you for last because I'm gonna suck up to you a little bit. So thank you.
I like it.
I didn't go to the first Near Fest, and I honestly can't remember if I didn't know about it, didn't hear about it, but I was
a bad start for a suck up, Eric.
Well, I'm getting so when I saw the announcement that Happy the Man had reformed, and I don't know if you had any part of that, so maybe I'll get to your question after you kind of go through the album. But again, I don't know how to thank you enough. Whatever you did, however you did it, pulling these guys in, that was a dream come true for me. My first of many Near Fests after that. So again, give us a run through of the album, and I do have a question for you. If it ends up being something you don't want to answer, I got a alternate question, but
okay,
get rolling with the album.
It's hard to add a lot more than what everybody else has already said. I agree. I think it's a phenomenal album. I think Crafty Hands gets it by a nose. I agree with the vocal stuff. I would love to see these two albums be completely instrumental. But one thing that struck me, I've got like this past week or two, I've gone back and listened to all of the material, all of Steve's archival releases, the live album, the Death's Crown, everything. And what really strikes me is that as much material as they had before these two albums, most of this material is very unique just to these two albums. These are by far the most dynamic, or the most, thinking of the stand tunes, the craziest. And I don't think anything on the other albums or any of that material comes close to these two. Now, yeah, there's the production and all that. There are some good songs on Beginnings and Third and things like that. Like Eye of the Storm we were talking about the other day. Yep. Ended up being on a Camel record. There's good material, but it doesn't really hold a flame to the material that's on these two albums. They're really phenomenal records, and if people don't have them, you need them in your collection. One thing I'll speak to, which is kind of around the ensemble playing, and completely agree. When you look at the credits for the songs, you might have a Stan song like Stumpy or Knee Bitten, but there is so much Kit Watkins on it. It's not just, hey, this is my song, I'm going to play 6 different solos. Like one of the songs, I think it's Knee Bitten Nymphs, Stan doesn't take a solo till 3.5 minutes in, and there's Kit all over the place. And you have Frank with the flutes and the saxes, which is phenomenal. And that's also a nice different tone that you get from this band, unlike a lot of the other bands in the genre, with the sax and the flute playing in unison with these, crazy guitar and keyboard riffs that both Kit and Frank are coming up with. But it's a great swing of moods. Like you said, some things are cinematic. The one I feel is probably the most cinematic. Actually, there's two. Mr. Mears' Reflections, I feel, is very cinematic, and New York Dream Suite. And that one really, it is a suite. There's really 3 or 4 very distinct parts. They're nice. They're really cool middle section where it gets frantic. It makes me think of New York City. It was sort of written about their times going back and forth between the DC area and New York when they're working on the Death's Crown material, and then getting assigned to Arista. But like George, I gravitate towards the crazier songs, the Stan songs on here, but you cannot deny how great Kit and Frank's songs are too. They may be a little more ethereal, more atmospheric, but the melodies and the playing is still just unbelievable. So yeah, I'm a big fan of this album. I'm really glad you picked it. I've been meaning to go back through their catalog and listen to everything. So this was an awesome excuse. I've had a couple rides to the shore in the last 2 weeks. So this and Crafty Hands and Death's Crown and Third, Better Late, got a lot of airplay in the last 2 weeks. So it's been fun.
Awesome. So my question for you, I know obviously having brought them into Nearfest, and if you're not comfortable answering, this is fine, but dealing with these guys, getting to meet them, bringing them on for that festival, any like stories or anything you could tell us about that?
So it's 23 years ago now, which is insane.
Yeah.
Rob and I went to Prog Day 99, and we knew that Stan Whitaker was there because he was playing with 10 Gin at the time.
Yeah.
And played and they played Steaming Pipes, I believe, which blew up the 10 Gin material out of the water. No offense to 10 Gin. So we got to the show actually that year. I think we got one day outside, and then the rest of it was inside of the
Cat's Cradle
club during the hurricane.
The Cat's Cradle.
Cat's Cradle, yep. So it was during that first day we were leaving the field, and Rob and I sort of caught up with Stan, and Frank Wyatt was there. So we could put the bug in their ear and say, hey, we started this festival. If you guys had any thoughts of maybe reforming, and they said, yeah, we've been talking about it. That might be the perfect excuse. So sure enough, they pulled it together, and they did one show in the DC area as a warm up. And then because as Stan says on the recording, we didn't want this to be our first gig. And then they came up, and in my opinion, they blew the place apart. It was fantastic. David Rosenthal did an unbelievable job of covering Kit Watkins material. Ron Riddle came back to play drums, and he was great. And Stan is
that being the first time that Ron Riddle ever appeared live with them.
Yeah, he was only in Crafty Hands.
Why didn't Kit want to come back?
He didn't want to play. He didn't want to perform.
He didn't want to perform live.
Yeah. But Eric, one thing you alluded to before, I was going through the albums, the CDs, and I opened up the Muse Awakens, and I completely forgot about this. I have a nice handwritten note from Rick Kennel, which I'm sure you can't see, but it says, "Hey Chad, this never would have happened without you and Rob. Thanks, enjoy."
Oh,
Really
I'd
cool.
be buried with that if they wrote it to me.
really cool. But as far as interaction with those guys, Frank could have been a sweeter guy. Stan, it was like your best friend from 5 minutes in. He just likes, always laughing, cracking a joke, giving you a hard time. Just an awesome guy. Rick Kennel was very nice. He was a little bit more of a businessy guy, so he made sure that the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed. I don't know if I had much interaction with Ron Riddle, but I got on very well with David Rosenthal too. He's a really nice guy.
People don't know, Chad, not to interrupt you, but he's Billy Joel's music director. Yeah. He's been with him for years.
Yeah, that's where I was going. Yeah, you're right.
And he started out, and Pete, I know you know the history.
With Rainbow, yeah.
19 years old when he was playing with Rainbow or something. So the guy's a wizard, right? I mean,
yeah, Rainbow, Whitesnake, Steve Vai, Cyndi Lauper.
Okay.
He had his own band called Red Dawn in the 80s. And then he's been with Billy Joel forever. And back around that time, Billy Joel was doing one of his tours with Elton John, and David Rosenthal got me backstage passes. Now, we didn't meet anyone but the crew, but that was cool to go backstage, see Dave, meet his wife, that kind of thing. But I haven't spoken to any of those guys in quite a while. I wrote to Stan the other day, and I haven't heard back from him yet. I was going to reach out to David as well, just to see how he's doing. But I did see Kit Watkins once. I saw him in a church in Philadelphia. There was a series there. I forget the name of the church over
Gatherings.
Gatherings. That's right.
You saw him play the Gatherings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I forgot Kit did that. That's wow.
Yeah,
I'm glad you saw that.
I think I went there with Rob, and I think my wife Cheryl went with us too.
Thanks for inviting me, Chad. Thanks.
Yeah, I know how that's how it feels, Ken. So he went over and did he did the ambient thing where he'd play one instrument and get it started and loop everything, and we would build these awesome soundscapes and play a sax over it, a keyboard. It was awesome. And I think I only have one of his albums. Don't tell him. And I think I have Azure, which I've been meaning to pull that out too. But
Azure is a really good one.
Yeah, this is a good one.
I remember that being good. But as far as my generic interaction with those guys, loved them. Absolutely loved them. They were great.
Well, thank you for that. That's a great story. And the fact that that note says it all. I mean, I think we all thank you for that, at least the fans. And I'm glad you guys all enjoyed this. And I know, probably some of you have a lot more history with them than I do. There were a couple of neat anecdotes I thought I'd throw in. I had read that Stan was one of the first people to use Paul Reed Smith.
Yeah.
Guitar wise, I think Pete or Chad, somebody mentioned that Kit went on to play with Camel. He was on I Can See Your House From Here. The Storm, which appears on Third Better Than Late, is on that record. And I don't remember if he played on Nude, but there is a track, whether it's Drafted or one of those he wrote, that is on Nude. I just can't remember that background. But if people are into them, I mean, there's a ton of stuff. Stan and Frank went on to do Oblivion Sun. Chad, they also obviously played Nearfest, I think, right. 2009
or 10.
9, okay. And there's a couple others. There's Pedal Giant Animals, which was also Frank and Stan, if you like that stuff. And then Frank there's a million people on this one. Zeitgeist, I think, Frank Wyatt and Friends. And I I got my name in here as a whatever you call it,
Patron?
patron. So that was kind of cool. But I just love these guys. I mean, for a band that had 2 records on a major label, there is a ton of material. Like we were talking about, Beginnings and Third, and I even had a retrospective. I think it was the first thing I ever got from them.
That was the first thing that came out in the CD age.
Okay, East West Records or something. It was
East Side
East Side.
Digital. East Side
Okay.
Digital.
Yes,
East Side
because
It was a Ryko label.
I was looking for it and I can't find it. I probably lent it to somebody because it's got, you know, kind of a best of.
Here's your visual, Eric.
That's it. That's it.
Oh, woo woo!
You know, we should really give Clive Davis some credit. He signs Herman Zobel, and then the next year, Happy the Man. I mean, you know, pretty amazing.
But I can't add. You guys covered the record amazing. Thank you. I'm glad everyone got into it and a lot of listening. And I just love these guys. I wish there was more out there. I know there's a lot of live stuff, I think, on Bandcamp, if I'm not mistaken. If you kind of
Yes,
poke around.
and if you listen, I mean, and it's interesting, but you will hear, if you listen to one live version of a song and then a different live version of a song, they played it exactly the same. It was kind of interesting. I mean, they were very much set pieces.
Yes.
I want to tell George a little story. I'm assuming it's on there. Like within a year, maybe less than a year, after The Muse Awakens was released, Happy the Man played on Sirius XM. And
Right, I forgot about that.
yeah. It's a pretty good show. It's a pretty good show. And it's a pretty good performance.
There's video of that too, Steve, right? I think at least Service with a Smile or something was out.
I don't know.
Okay.
There's audio, and I assume it's on YouTube. I have the audio. The band gave it to me, but and you used to be able to get it, I think, if you were like a Happy the Man patron or whatever. Anyway, it's not rare. But there's this great bit where, because George is saying the thing about Stan referring to it as cartoon music, and there's a bit where Frank is introducing Ibby It Is, which they do, and he says, "This is a song we wrote for our second record, and it's about a little imaginary cartoon creature, as most of our songs are," which is kind of a crazy thing to say on air in 2006 or whatever. But yeah, I mean, it's just like, so yeah, they all thought it was cartoon music, I think.
So yeah, thank you guys a lot. That was great.
Eric, did you ever imagine that Steve would be like the Happy the Man Rain Man?
Hey, it's good. I like hearing all that stuff. It's fun. Good stories.
I saw them in the fall of 1975. I was just 16. They blew my proggy brains out. They were so great, and every time, I mean, even the reunions, even all the reunions, they were really great. They never underperformed. I mean, there were better times and not as incredible times, but in general, I mean, their consistency and their ability to always perform at this hard stuff at this very high level was really amazing and unmatched. And I mean, that's certainly what I walked away from seeing them throughout their lives, early and later when I saw them. It was always like, these guys are fucking incredible. So yeah, they blew me away.
I do want to say, because we were talking about Frank before, Frank and I communicated quite a bit over the years, because I covered a lot of the albums that he was working on, and whether it be this project or that project. And not long before he died, he reached out to me to review that last album that you showed, Eric. And I had heard that he was kind of sick, but he, when we were communicating, he never mentioned anything. And it seemed like within months after that came out and I reviewed it here on the channel and on the webzine, he was gone. But always a really, really nice guy to me, and just very down to earth dude. And he's much missed.
He also built high-end speakers. Well, I got to be careful saying high-end around Ken, but yeah, I think Rob LaDuca has a set of really nice speakers that Frank built for him.
Yeah, he did work in cabinetry for a period of time when he was out of the music business. He was a woodworker. I mean, that's something that that was a job, or that was a skill. That's the word. That was a skill that allowed him, to eat when, in the period.
Pay the bills, right, Steve?
Sorry, what'd you say?
I said to pay the bills, basically.
That's pay the bills, exactly.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks, guys. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you all. That was
This was a nice respite from Obscured by Clouds.
I was gonna. So
Yeah, I don't think the
is this
controversy
the first
is-
time that everybody basically loved it and basically, obviously, and agreed about this isn't, the vocal songs are good, but they're not as good. I mean, it was like, I think we all just kind of said variations of the same. Wow, this is great.
Yeah.
yeah, I think so.
So who's doing the next one?
Who is next?
Doesn't it-
It's either George or you, Ken. I don't remember.
Did we
No,
pick it, or I thought Eric gets to pick who's the next person? No.
Oh, he does actually. Yeah.
Ah,
I thought we were going in the same order as we went the first time.
I mean, that's what I figure. I just don't remember what.
Whatever you want. Whatever you want. I don't want to.
But before we do, we don't have to figure it out today, because the next episode is our Q&A episode. So in 2 weeks from today, we have taken well over 200 questions. Out of those 200 questions, I'll be picking 20 or 25, and we will, on the next episode, we will go through the questions. A lot of you had questions for specific guys on the panel. Some had just general questions. So we'll be going through, I'm giving the guys all the questions this week, and we'll be answering them on the next episode. So tune in for that, which will be lots of fun.
Ken, why are you always so mean?
Yeah.
You don't know by now?
That's your question, Steve. That's not.
That's my question. Ken,
That's just your question.
All right, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks everybody here. And Eric, great job tonight.
Thank you.
Wonderful, a great choice, and a great album. So for everybody watching, let us know what you think of Happy the Man, the self-titled debut from 1977, down there in the comments. If you've never heard it, right? Like I forget who said it. Might have been Chad, it might have been Eric, whoever said it. If this is not in your collection, it needs to be. It's one of the greats of the 70s. Go check it out. Come back. Let us know what you think. And visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube all together. All the damn time. Please go check out Wayside Music. Please go check out Laser's Edge. For Chad Hutchinson, Eric Porter, Ken Golden, Steve Feigenbaum, and George Lemay, I am Pete Pardo. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you in 2 weeks here on In the Prog Seat. Take care.